Yukon Trail by Willis Lindquist, illustrated by Sam Laterza. Mush. Under the lowering Alaskan sky, young Steve Woodford stepped from the train at the snow-covered outpost of Nenana. He looked anxiously around for his Uncle Jim, the famous flying doctor of the Yukon, of whom he had boasted so much at the orphanage. For years he had dreamed of going to the Yukon. Now he was on his way, and he was happy. He was going to have a real home and belong to a real family. He hoped Uncle Jim and Aunt Bess would like him. The young Indian who came up grinning couldn't have been over 16. "You're Steve?" he asked in perfect English. "Well, I'm Sam Ketchum. I've got a letter for you. There's been a lot of sickness up in the Yukon, and your uncle couldn't fly down for you." Steve's heart sank as he took the letter. It was short. Uncle Jim wrote about how busy he was and that he might not be able to fly down for 2 or 3 weeks. "Sam Ketchum is a young Indian guide who works for me," the letter went on. "I've told him to make you comfortable at the hotel. In a day or 2, he will be starting back for the Yukon with my new dog team. You could go with him if you wish, but I would not advise you to do so. It is a 350-mile mush through wilderness and tundra, and it would be a hardship for a boy accustomed to the soft life of civilization." Steve read the letter several times at the hotel. It disturbed him that his uncle should think he was soft. When he joined Sam for a dinner of venison roast, he said, "I wanted to come up here last year, Sam, but Uncle Jim wouldn't let me. He wrote that I was too young. He said that the Yukon was a man's country, and it was no place for a boy. So he made me wait a year. And now he thinks I'm soft. I'm going to show him, Sam. I'm going with you and the dog team." Sam laughed. "It won't be easy," he warned. "But you have to learn about dogs sometime if you're going to be of any help to your uncle. We'll start at dawn." It frightened Steve to think of the trip when he went to bed. He had never seen the big sled dogs. Some were part wolf and said to be dangerous. It was still dark when the hotel man came with a set of fur breeches and a hooded parka, fur boots, and a fur sleeping bag. Sam was waiting for him at the sled, with 11 mighty huskies straining at their harnesses, anxious to be off. "Better meet some of your dogs," Sam said. This first one, your leader, is Mutt. He's been to the Yukon before, and he knows the trail." The tawny big brute lowered its head and watched Steve with suspicion. Steve fought down his fear and leaned over to pet the dog. Its fangs bared in a snarl. "Not too close," Sam warned. "Mutt doesn't know you yet, and you better stay clear of Kuga, this big Malmoot. He's a real troublemaker." "Why is the sled tied to a tree?" Steve asked. "Because otherwise they'd be off like a flash, and we couldn't stop them," Sam explained. He pointed to an iron rod suspended above the ground at the rear of the sled. It looked like a narrow rake. "That's your brake. You step on it, and the prongs dig into the snow and stop the sled." They packed, and Steve got on the top of the sled. "Hold on," Sam warned as he untied the rope from the tree. The dogs were off, 11 big brutes, harnessed in pairs, except for Mutt, who took the lead. They raced over the snow in full gallop. The sled bounced and flew, and it took all of Steve's strength to hold on. Standing on the runners in back, Sam gave a hearty laugh. Dogs are always wild to get started. They'll soon slow down. They did. For hours they went, skirting great slopes of spruce and Norway pine, and on, into the still white wilderness. At midday they stopped for a few minutes' rest and a bite to eat. "Now you drive," suggested Sam. "I'll run behind for a while to get warm. But whatever you do, don't fall off the sled. You'll not be able to stop the dogs, and you'll lose them and the sled and all your food. It's not a good way to die." Steve leaped on the runners. "Get going!" he shouted. Mutt turned his head back and looked at him, but nothing happened. "Holler mush," Sam suggested. "When you want to go right, holler gee, and for left, up. And swing the sled around the corners so it doesn't tip." Steve nodded. "Mush!" he screamed. It worked. He stood proudly on the runners. He was driving a dog team. There was real work to it, he soon discovered. Keeping the sled upright at curves was tricky, and he had to be careful to avoid stumps and rocks that might smash the sled. On the downslopes, he stood on the brake to keep from running over the dogs. But suddenly it happened. He made the mistake of looking back too long at Sam, who was jogging half a mile behind them. He hit a slope, and his feet slipped from the runners. But he held on, dragging as the sled gathered speed downhill until it pushed the dogs into a wild, scrambled heap. Then the sled tipped. It started one of the wildest dogfights Steve had ever seen. Each seemed to be blaming the others for what had happened, and they snarled and slashed with white-fanged fury. "Stop them! Stop them!" Sam yelled. Steve stood frozen with fear. He didn't move. He didn't dare venture close. Alone on the tundra. Sam came full speed, screaming at the dogs. He pried them loose one by one with a snowshoe and straightened up their harnesses, which had become badly tangled. Then he mopped the sweat from his face. "You'll have to learn how to do that quick," he gasped. "If you don't, you'll lose a dog or two before you know it." For 5 days they went on, and then Sam began to have chills and fever. "I was in the hospital for a week before you came," he explained. "Maybe I left too soon. It's coming back." By noon he was groaning with pain and could not leave the sled. "There's a settlement over on Carlson Creek," he whispered. "You'd better get me there fast." Steve reached the hollow among the bluffs in 3 hours, but only the women and children were there to meet them. The men were out on a week-long hunt. "This one needs the doctor," said an old woman. Steve went cold with dread, but he knew what had to be done. "Sam says my lead dog knows the trail well. I'll go get the doctor." Sam mumbled in protest. "You'll stay here," he gasped. "Your uncle flies to this settlement every so often for a check." "It might be weeks," said the old woman. "There is much sickness." "I'll go," said Steve. He had no choice. Soon he found himself alone on the trail with a fierce pack of Malamutes and Eskimo Huskies, and he felt panic rising within him. He wondered if he could handle the team. He began talking to the dogs, calling them by name as Sam had told him to do. He stopped for the night under a sheltering cliff near the staggering thicket of birches. Now the moment he dreaded had come. He had to handle the big dogs. Steve tried not to show his fear. The big leader dog watched with yellow eyes as he approached, its ears flattened to the massive head. As Steve reached down to unfasten the harness, the wolf dog snarled. "Easy, Mutt!" Swiftly, Steve unharnessed the dog and led it to the nearest birch tree and tied it up. He came away weak, but bursting with happiness he had never known. He could do it! The other dogs, even the big Malamute, Kuga, were easy after that. One day followed another with perfect weather. The dogs were beginning to know him. Some even licked his hand. But Mutt, the leader, remained solemn. Then he saw the plane in the sky one morning. It circled above him. His uncle waved, and Steve, forming big letters in the snow, told him to go to Sam at Carlson's settlement. A howling Arctic blizzard started that night and kept him in his sleeping bag for 2 days. The third morning dawned clear, and he looked out on a white world. No dogs were in sight. They had all been buried by the snow. As they mushed north that afternoon, he became careless. He did not see the low branch until it struck him with a stunning blow in the face. He was falling. "Don't lose your sled or you'll die," Sam's word came roaring back to his ears. With all his strength he tried to hold on, but it was no use. His fingers slipped and he lunged headlong into the snow. He floundered. He tried to rise to his feet, but the earth seemed to tilt on end, and he couldn't tell which side was up. The dogs and the sled were speeding away. He could see them vaguely. In a few moments they would be gone. There was nothing he could do to stop them. His food, his sleeping bag, even his snowshoes were on the sled. A man couldn't live very long on the lonely tundra without them. In that reeling instant of terror, he seemed doomed. His mind cleared, and instinctively he cried out at the top of his lungs, "Gee! Gee! Gee, Mutt!" He held his breath. For a terrible instant, nothing happened. But suddenly, the big lead dog swung to the right. He waited until the whole team had turned. Then he screamed again, "Gee! Gee, Mutt!" Once more the lead dog turned. They were coming back now. Steve got to his feet and stumbled to meet them, waving his arms. He tripped over a snowdrift and sprawled before the onrushing team. That was all he could remember for a long time. When he opened his eyes, finally, it seemed that a miracle had happened. Mutt, towering over him, was licking his face. He threw his arms around the big dog, buried his face in the heavy fur, and let the tears come. Even a man could cry in Alaska if there was no one there to see his tears. From that day on, his uncle paid him daily visits to watch his progress and to drop sandwiches and food from Aunt Bess. In the first of these packages, he found a note. "I have seen Sam," wrote his uncle. "He is doing fine, thanks to you. If you keep up your good speed, you should reach home in 3 days. We'll be waiting." Steve felt a deep inner excitement. Home! In 3 days! He could drive a dog team now, and he felt sure that he could be of real use to his uncle. They would not find him soft and useless. They would like him. Near sunset, 3 days later, as he came down the slope into the small settlement of Unison in the Yukon, his uncle and half the village came out to meet him. They were cheering and waving and smiling. His tall uncle wore a large smile and threw an arm over his shoulder. "Good boy, Steve," he said warmly. To the people of the village, he said, raising his voice, "I am mighty proud to introduce you to my nephew, Steve. He mushed all the way from Nenana in 15 days, and that's a record for any of us to shoot at." When they entered the log cabin, which was to be his new home, there were gifts from almost everyone in the village. Snowshoes, parkas, beaded reindeer pants, a beautiful Malamute pup, a carving from a walrus tusk, and bows and arrows. Steve mumbled his thanks to the smiling villagers who stood before him. They were a strange mixture of old sourdoughs, Eskimos, Indians, and boys and girls. One young man spoke up. "The Flying Doctor has cared for us and saved many of us from death. We love him as a father, and we are glad to welcome another of his blood." It was not until later, when Aunt Bess and Uncle Jim and Steve were alone, that Uncle Jim spoke. "I want to confess, Steve, that I've been worried about having you here. I wanted you to be happy, but I knew that a soft white boy from civilization would soon be looked upon by these people with contempt." He smiled and took Steve firmly by the shoulders. "But I see now that I was wrong. I need not have worried. You did what had to be done. You've got the makings of a real Yukon man." Steve turned quickly away to play with the pup, and to hide the mist of happiness that had come to his eyes.